Hi, this is Lori Rader Day, author of The Day I Died, and you're listening to the Cook Memorial Public Library podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Cook Memorial Public Library podcast, where we invite you to spend a few minutes with the staff at Cook Library. I'm Nate Goss, and this is yet another edition of The Past is Present, where we dig a little bit into Libertyville's local history. I've asked Jenny Berry, our local history librarian, who we often have come on for these podcasts, to come back and talk about, we get the question all the time, why are we called Cook Memorial Public Library? We're Libertyville, Vernon Hills, parts of Mundelein, different areas, none of which have Cook in their name. and Cook isn't the name of the township. We're going to start talking about the library and how we got our name, but as you'll find out, that has a lot to do with a certain person, Ansel B. Cook. So, all right, let's get started. Jenny, Cook Memorial Public Library. Why the heck is that our name?
Okay. Well, there was a little bit of library service in town before the Cook Memorial Public Library. The Alpha Club, which then became the Liberal Women's Club, had a subscription library in one of the drugstores and then in Village Hall for a while.
And subscription library would be one where people would actually pay like a membership fee.
You might pay
or
like
something?
$1 to be a member and be able to check out books.
Okay.
But there wasn't a library district. There wasn't a formal library supported by the town until we get to 1921. So there's a gentleman in town named Ansel B. Cook, and in his will, it said, in general, this is simplifying it quite a bit, that when he passed, or when his wife passed and survived him, that he wanted a library built in his name. And we generally say that he gave his house and his land to the village of Libertyville to become a library and park. That's kind of what ended up happening. He really wanted this big hall built in his name. And by the time his third wife, Emily Barrows Cook, died, that really wasn't a possibility. There wasn't the money around to do that.
Possible. Yeah.
Right. But she did make sure that instead the house was donated with the purpose of becoming a library.
And this would be Cook House, which is right in the middle of Libertyville.
Exactly,
so
right.
Was his house always the main center of Libertyville?
Well, the house that's here, it was built about 1878, we think.
Okay.
He had bought the land, Mr. Cook had bought the land from his father-in-law, Dr. Jesse Foster, who was the first practicing physician in the area, in 1870. But we don't think built the house till a little bit later. But this really was the center and the heart of historic Libertyville in what was called the Grove, which is basically Milwaukee Avenue back to Butler Lake. Generally. George Varden, who's the first settler in the area, had built his cabin. Then Jesse Foster had bought the land a little bit later. He had a house on the land as well before the cookhouse that we know was built. But yeah, it's really, this is where the first people of Libertyville settled around. It was basically the same thing that we gather around today for our community events.
Yeah. The town square.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It really is a town square. We don't have a courthouse, but we have a big house.
Yes. We have a cookhouse.
We have a cookhouse. So Emily passed away in December of 1919, and through the different legal things that have to happen, the house was deeded to the village. There had to be some fundraising done in order to open it up as a library because there really wasn't any money left to support it. And then in 1921, the library opened up in the cookhouse.
Ansel B. Cook, how did he come into his money? I mean, that house is pretty nice for the time, I would think.
Yeah, it's a large house, but it's not as large as people might think if you come inside.
And I should also say, if you're lower middle class, you're not putting in your will to start a library in your name. So, this guy had some means. What was he doing?
Yeah. He really made his money as a mason or in the masonry contracting building area. He and his father, Willard, had been masons in Connecticut, where they came from. They had come out here in 1846 and bought a farm over in Fremont Township, kind of Midlothian Road and Winchester Road, about that area. In 1853, Willard and Ansel also secured the contract to lay the first flagstone sidewalks in the city of Chicago. He helped rebuild the city of Chicago after the Great Fire of 1871. He built several building blocks, some of which are still standing today. His company was responsible for the masonry on the Chicago Water Tower, which survived the Chicago Fire. So most of his, I would say, adult and professional career was really in the city of Chicago. And the Cook House that we have here was really built as his summer home or his country home. It was not his main residence for most of his life.
Oh, really?
Not really until his death. I'm sorry, not his death, his retirement in the late 1880s. He doesn't still live there. Anyway, when he was in the city of Chicago, he served on the city council. He was president of the city council for a term. He was also a state representative from Cook County for 2 terms and 1 from Lake County. So he was involved in politics as well as business.
Now, we get this question all the time, but there is no connection between Ansel B. Cook and Cook County.
No, Cook County existed before the Cooks even came out this way, and it was named after a man named Daniel Cook, who was the first state attorney of Illinois.
Gotcha. So back to the story of the library. So it's 1921, you said, and that's really when now was it that they took the home itself and turned it into the library, or did they actually build something?
Right. No, they didn't buy anything or build anything. They just turned the house into a library. If you see pictures of the house when the Cooks lived there, it looks like a Victorian clapboard house. It's wood-sided, a very nice house, but not like how it looks today. So this is the early 1920s, and you're going to turn this house into a civic building. So what do? You stucco it. You take off the porch and you put on these big, impressive columns. So it looks a little bit different than it did when the Cooks lived there, but it looked much more like a civic building. Now it looks more like a civic building. Yes. Right. And actually the house is on the National Register of Historic Places, but not as the Ansel B. Cook home. It's on as the Cook Memorial Public Library because there were significant enough changes to the architecture on the outside that it would not qualify under the original name. By 1968, you can imagine the house was overflowing with books, and you can stop in and see some of the pictures of that.
You said 1968?
1968.
So it really serviced for decades.
Almost 50 years.
Yeah.
In 1968, the library that we currently have was built, and the house became the home of the Libertyville Mundelein Historical Society, which has been the stewards of the house since 1968.
And our library is still loosely connected to the house. There's one door.
It is. We sometimes refer to it. We call it the link, or some people call it the secret passage. To maintain the spirit of the will that the house was supposed to be a library. When the new library was built, there is a connecting hallway between the library building and the house. However, the house is owned by the village, not by the library.
Yeah. Although you just think of how far it's come from just this little idea of building a library out of your home to now servicing, is it 50 or 60,000 people?
A much bigger population.
Two full-service library buildings, neither of which are actually part of the home anymore.
Right, exactly. But there's still a lot of people around town, and some of the Historical Society board members as well, that the Cook House was their library growing up. I mean, they went all the way through high school with that being their library. I know we have one of our children's librarians who talks about climbing up in the butler's pantry to get to the encyclopedias when she was a kid. So, and I think one of the reasons that house is still standing, if not the reason, is because it served as a library. That is prime commercial space in downtown Libertyville.
So one of the nicest things about the Cook House is that people can go look at it. And I've been in there before. It's a really cool house because of all the stuff that's in it. It's filled with artifacts and things that are very cool. So if someone who lives in the area wanted to visit the Cook House, what do they do? It's not always open, but it's open quite a bit.
Right. So. The Historical Society is an all-volunteer-run, donation-based society. So we're open as we can. Sundays in the summer, from 2 to 4 every Sunday. The house is also open during the Libertyville House Walk, which is June 10th this year, as well as on the Saturday of Libertyville Days from 12 to 2. It's a great time to come in, and the house has been done up as a Victorian home. You won't see any remnants, really, of its time as a library. It's supposed to be representative of the time that
when it was
the
a
Cook family lived there, right? The things that are there, we have a handful of items that are from the Cook family, but when the house became a library, most things were sold off. off or auctioned off. So there's only a few things that have come back to the Historical Society that belong to the Cooks. Otherwise, what's set up in the house is representative of the time that they lived there. And if you can't make it during the summer, we invite you back at Christmas. The house gets fully decorated for the Christmas with garlands and trees
Very nice,
and everything.
yeah.
And that's actually probably my favorite time of year in the Cook House.
It sounds like a great time to go.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jenny, for being on the podcast and giving us a little insight into why we are Cook Memorial Public Library.
Sure, you're welcome.
One thing I wanted to point out for our listeners, you have written up a 3-part blog post on Ansel B. Cook.
Right.
Is that also about the library's history in there as well, or mostly about him?
It's mostly about him. It touches on the library at the end in terms of his legacy in the town, but it's more detailed about specifically his life, his family, and his business and political career.
Great. Yeah, that is a great series as part of the Past is Present section of our blog, which is our Shelf Life blog. That blog can be found at shelflife.cooklib.org, and we highly recommend you go in there and dig a little bit deeper. We always want to mention when we do these Past is Present series, our local history page on the research section of our website, where you can find all sorts of different clippings files and different resources for digging into your town's history. That's our website, www.cooklib.org. Before we go, we want to make sure that we let you know that there are ways you can get in touch with us, ways that you can leave some feedback. You can always email us, webmaster@cooklib.org. We are listening. Or just send us a message or hit us up on Twitter @CookLibrary. Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you share it with everyone. And if you feel so inclined, we would really appreciate a nice rating on iTunes. We will be back soon, but until then, keep reading, keep watching, and keep listening.